Why avoidants give you hope, then take it away? Why do avoidants give you just enough hope to stay and then suddenly take it away when you start to believe again? This is one of the most painful and confusing patterns in avoidant relationships because it doesn't look like cruelty on the surface. It looks like possibility. It looks like progress. It looks like love finally waking up. One moment they're warm, present, emotionally available, even talking about the future. The next moment, they're distant, cold, distracted, or emotionally unreachable. And what makes this especially damaging is that nothing obvious happens in between. No big fight, no betrayal, no clear reason, just a shift, a withdrawal, a silence that feels louder than any argument. And the question that haunts you is simple. Why give me hope if you're just going to take it away? To understand this, you need to stop assuming the avoidant is operating from the same emotional system you are. When an avoidant gives hope, it's often genuine in that moment. They're not always pretending. They're not always manipulating consciously. What's happening is that closeness feels good until it doesn't. When the relationship is light, undefined, emotionally distant, or uncertain, the avoidant feels safe. They can show up. They can flirt. They can open up a little. They can be affectionate. But the moment that closeness starts turning into emotional expectation, when consistency is required, when attachment deepens, when the bond starts to feel real, their nervous system interprets that as danger. Not emotional danger to you, but loss of autonomy to them. And that's when the withdrawal begins. This is why the hope feels so real. Because it was real, just temporary. Avoidants often connect in waves, not lines. They surge forward emotionally when they feel safe, unpressured, and free. They retreat the moment the connection asks them to stay present consistently. So they give you breadcrumbs of intimacy, then disappear when the emotional bill comes due. And from your perspective, this feels cruel. It feels like they dangled a future in front of you and then ripped it away. But from their internal world, it feels like survival. Like they're pulling away from something that suddenly feels overwhelming, engulfing, or threatening, even if you did nothing wrong. One of the most confusing parts of this dynamic is how convincing the hope is. Avoidants don't give weak hope. They give intense hope. They'll say things like, "I've never felt this way before," or "I've never opened up to anyone like this," or "I see a future with you." And you believe them because it matches their behavior in that moment. They're present. They're attentive. They're emotionally open. But what they don't realize, or don't fully understand, is that those words create emotional gravity. Once spoken, they create expectation. And expectation is exactly what their nervous system rebels against later. So when they pull away, it feels like emotional whiplash. Your mind starts searching for reasons. You replay conversations. You wonder what changed. You blame yourself. You think, if I hadn't gotten attached, if I hadn't hoped, if I had stayed guarded. But here's the painful truth. The problem wasn't that you hoped. The problem is that the avoidant offered hope they couldn't emotionally sustain. Not because they're evil, but because their capacity for intimacy collapses under consistency. Avoidants are often deeply uncomfortable with being needed. They may enjoy being wanted, admired, desired, but being needed implies responsibility. It implies reliability. It implies showing up even when they don't feel like it. And when you start leaning in emotionally, when your attachment activates, their deactivating strategies kick in. They might get busy. They might become emotionally vague. They might start focusing on your flaws. They might convince themselves they're not ready or that something is missing. And instead of communicating honestly, they retreat, quietly, confusingly, leaving you holding the emotional weight alone. This is why the hope feels like a trap. Because every time they come back, every warm message, every check-in, every moment of vulnerability, it reactivates your attachment system. Your heart opens again. You think, this time is different. And then, just as you settle into that hope, it's taken away again. Not through a clean ending, but through distance. And distance is harder than rejection because it leaves room for imagination. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you attached to potential instead of reality. What makes this dynamic especially addictive is that the avoidant often returns after you start pulling away. When you stop chasing, when you stop explaining, when you emotionally detach a little, that's when they reappear. Not because they're ready for consistency, but because the pressure has dropped. The threat of closeness has faded. And in that space, they can feel safe enough to reconnect. So they give you hope again. And in that space, they can feel safe enough to reconnect. So they give you hope again. And the cycle repeats. This is not a relationship pattern. It's a nervous system loop. One person moves toward connection to feel secure. The other moves away to feel safe. And hope becomes the currency that keeps the loop alive. You hold on to the good moments, believing they represent the real them. But the withdrawal is just as real. And the relationship you're actually in is defined not by their best moments, but by the pattern as a whole. Here's the hardest part to accept. Avoidants don't take hope away because you asked for too much. They take hope away because they cannot regulate closeness. The more emotionally meaningful the connection becomes, the more dysregulated they feel. So instead of leaning in and building capacity, they step back and numb themselves. And because they often lack emotional language, they don't explain this clearly. They just disappear emotionally and leave you to make sense of the damage. Over time, this erodes your self-trust. You start doubting your instincts. You stop trusting your excitement. You learn to brace for disappointment even during happy moments. And that's the real cost of avoidant hope. It teaches you to fear joy. It trains your nervous system to associate connection with loss. And if you're not careful, you start shrinking yourself to avoid triggering their withdrawal. You become quieter, less expressive, more patient, less demanding, until you're no longer fully yourself in the relationship. So what's the way out? It starts with clarity, not confrontation. You don't win with avoidance by chasing consistency from someone who hasn't built the capacity for it. You win by observing patterns instead of promises. By understanding that hope without follow-through is not love, it's emotional instability. Real connection doesn't come and go. It doesn't disappear when it's needed most. It doesn't punish you for getting attached. When you stop responding to hope alone and start responding to consistency, you change the dynamic. Not by forcing them to change, but by refusing to emotionally invest in cycles that cost you your peace. And here's the quiet truth avoidants rarely expect. The moment you stop being emotionally available on their terms, the power shifts. Because the cycle only works when you're willing to keep believing without evidence. Avoidants give hope because they crave connection. They take it away because they fear it. And unless they consciously work on that internal conflict, no amount of patience, understanding, or love from you will stabilize it. The question isn't why they do it anymore. The question is, how many times are you willing to rebuild hope from the same broken pattern?